What is Grinnell, Iowa? It came from a plan, a vision. It came from a man looking across the prairie and envisioning a city, commerce, and a free place to worship. An enlightened, welcoming place, a place that can make a great hometown and aspire to change the world. And it comes from a relentless, undaunted pursuit of that vision. Like when a killer cyclone ripped through the town, founder J.B. Grinnell saw to the fundraising, and soon the town and the campus were rebuilt. It's a place that ambitiously challenges itself to do better, to do more, where the community chorus sings opera. Grinnell is a place where residents invest their own money in projects that revitalize a beautiful downtown. It's a place where local boys got great educations and went on to change the world and change their hometown. It's a place that attracts college students from all over the world and has sent them out after graduation to improve that world. Recognizing the value of the common good, Grinnellians came together to create one of the finest small-town medical centers anywhere. It's a place that inspired a young man to help guide this country through its most difficult times of economic hardship and war. To know Grinnell, Iowa, is to know that there is a place with good neighbors and world-class education, where kids ride their bikes wherever their hearts take them. It's a place to worship that understands the value of fostering business, of planning for future development, that continuously aspires to make life better. This is why J.B. Grinnell moved here. This is why people have moved here all along. And it started with a vision.
Central Park has always been ground zero for Grinnell, but this was the spot where J.B. Grinnell envisioned the location for the block that was for church and education to the north, and this was the site of the first Congregational church. This was the site of the first school just next to it, still a church today, and of course now the school has been converted into the community center and city hall. His house was across the street just east of the park. That entire block was his. Eventually, they built the Monroe Hotel on J.B. Grinnell's front yard, which happened to be just north of the depot and is still intact today, the depot that was built in the 1880s. The train first came through in 1863, and J.B. built the town knowing that the tracks were going to extend out this way. There was a red flag sticking in the middle of the prairie when he came here in 1854, and that flag is just about the site of the depot.
And really, that depot building is a wonderful example of typical train depot styles of the late 19th century. So much so that it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. Then in the mid-90s, John and Jewel Kinsinger from Grinnell made a significant investment to fix it up and very lovingly recreated some of the original pieces and ornaments that went into that depot and turned it into a restaurant, the Depot Crossing.
Grinnell is a great place to raise a family, and I'm very glad that that's the choice that we made. We lived in a near suburb of Denver, and we were starting to, think about schools, and we were starting to think about the environment in which these kids would grow up. And we were sitting watching TV one night, and there was an ad for a John Deere riding lawnmower, and it's mowing this sweep of grass with a nice white church sitting there, and it looked like Iowa, and I don't know if it was or not. And we looked at each other and said, let's move to Iowa. So I'm entering Grinnell from the east on 6, and immediately there's all these old homes and these tree-lined streets, and a minute into town you're at the college, and I knew within minutes, this is it. And then within a few months, we had found a home, and a few months after that we moved into it. And we were trying to sort of recreate the atmosphere that existed when we were kids.
I mean, that's the philosophy of the villages.
Well, I'm from Bombay, India originally. Was born and raised. Spent 18 years there. And actually that's part of the reason why I chose to come to Grinnell, because I felt like I'd been in this huge city, which is now close to 18 million people, which is pretty big. So I wanted to get a different experience, you know.
I think I love everything here, and especially I like the people here who are really interesting and really dynamic.
The whole concept of, being in the Midwest and how just walking down the street you meet new people and you strike up conversations. That's something that's so unusual from both our backgrounds. It's weird for me to go back home because every time I step onto a crowded bus to get to someplace, I always want to say hi to everyone around me. And I do sometimes just out of habit because that's something I've really picked up at Grinnell.
I know a lot of people in town, including immigrants, including local people, including professors, retired or who are still in the college. So, and also people in the hospital where I volunteer, and in the high school where I volunteer. So I think it's a really very nice relationship with the town, yeah. I think it was a really great experience to open up myself. Now I feel much more comfortable approaching people.
And I've grown a lot. And that's something I don't feel would have happened anywhere but Grinnell.
When J.B. Grinnell arrived in central Iowa, it was mostly prairie.
He would have seen an amazing sea of grass, just rolling hillsides of grass. Nothing like the expanse. We just have no idea what it really looked like at the time those first people were settling this area.
Here we are at one of the prairie areas in the Crumb Preserve, and if you stand in front of it, you get a little bit of a sense of the openness of it, what one writer called the horizontal grandeur.
The Conard Environmental Research Area was purchased by the college in 1968, primarily from the urging of several biology faculty who were looking for a place for students to conduct field research.
Some of the very earliest explorers called this whole central part of the country the Great American Desert. They also thought that the absence of trees indicated infertile soil. Figured out their mistake on that one pretty quickly. Nice, rich Iowa loam.
Main Street has changed a fair bit over the years. Some of the great buildings that were here at the north end aren't here anymore. Now the trend is in the opposite direction, and it's aimed toward preserving those important pieces.
In communities like Grinnell, smaller towns, is that real sense that going to the movies was part of what life is. Well, we got involved in this over 2 years ago. And there is a local grassroots development organization by the name of the Grinnell Private Investment Corporation. And they focus on downtown real estate properties, particularly ones that are not currently being utilized up to their full potential. There's a real faith in the continued growth and vitality of Grinnell. It's not just a group of investors that put the major money toward this. I mean, this is a real community effort.
We gave everybody a chance to feel good by buying a small plaque, being a part of the theater program for $35, whatever it is. Everybody's got an integral part, and the more people we get to take ownership, the more successful it's going to be.
My father came here in 1910 to go to Grinnell College with $11 in his pocket and a scholarship, and he worked at the newspaper while he was here, and then he came back and purchased it. In 1949, when Al and I decided at his invitation to come here, it wasn't nearly as traumatic for me as it was for Al.
After having lived the previous 6 or 7 or 8 years in Chicago and Washington, D.C., I'd gotten used to all the things to do and see and all that. We were good friends, and then became better than good friends. And she explained the virtues of Grinnell, and I said, no, I'm Chicago, and I even gave up going back east. And finally, you know, the old saying, a man runs after a woman until she catches him. Well, she caught me, so I decided that, yeah, maybe I ought to try it.
Well, basically, we were joining a family business. The
newspaper business,
the newspaper business, which was quite a change for Al, but he made an admirable change. He did, as he says, he didn't know what he was getting into, and he really came only for a year, and then decided that it was okay, and he's become a real advocate for Iowa.
I mentioned H.W. Spaulding. Their complex just west of 4th Avenue employed hundreds and hundreds of people. They were turning out thousands of buggies a year until 1910 or so, when they decided they were going to get into the automobile business and compete with Ford, and thought they could compete with Ford, believing that people wanted handcrafted automobiles that were pieces of art versus an assembly line assembled car that didn't nearly have the integrity that a handcrafted car would have, and of course they were wrong. But the Spaulding building here was one more piece that they added to the downtown. Additional retail space for downtown, and upstairs a series of really nice apartments for downtown living.
J.B. Grinnell was nobody's fool.
To try to characterize J.B. Grinnell would be difficult, because many of his qualities were really the antithesis of each other.
Well, he was an entrepreneur, miscast as a, not miscast, but kind of miscast as a minister.
He was a prohibitionist and a...
abolitionist.
And a what?
Abolitionist.
Prohibitionist and abolitionist, that's what I want to say.
He might not be too proud of the fact that there's now alcohol served in various places.
But he was also a very good businessman, and he did not let those other qualities get in the way of his being a good businessman.
Some of the people didn't much care for J.B. because he was so hyperactive and so bossy and so able to get things done, which they couldn't do.
The reason that Grinnell is amenable to diversity has its roots right back to J.B. Grinnell.
He commanded authority because he was very bright in what he was saying, but it was also very clear that Bob Noyce was a common man. He loved Grinnell. The Noyce family moved in here when he was about 10 years old. Bob himself had a personality that even as a 10-year-old, he made you like him. As an 8th grader, jumping off roofs with an airplane, trying to make it fly, things of that sort. He was an extremely audacious guy.
As a Grinnell High School student, Noyce started studying with Grinnell College physics professor Grant Gale. Together, Noyce and Gale explored the frontier of electrical components, particularly a brand new technology called the transistor. Noyce went on to MIT, and then California, where, in 1957, at a place that would eventually be named Silicon Valley, he invented the silicon-based integrated circuit, launching the computer revolution. A savvy and competitive entrepreneur, he co-founded the chipmaker Intel in 1968. He also became a prominent member of the college's board of directors, returning frequently to Grinnell and helping the college build its remarkable endowment. He died suddenly of a heart attack at age 62 in 1990. But from humble beginnings in Grinnell, the son of a Congregational preacher, Robert Noyce changed the world as one of the great inventors of the modern era.
I think there is a connection, yes. between the character of the town and the character of people like Bob Noyce, but it's a connection of people of that type that's gone clear back to J.B. Grinnell.
Okay, right at 64 going on.
Wait, actually, can we start at 59?
Okay, how about 57?
Okay.
Mais si je t'aime, si je t'aime l'oiseau que tu croyais se prendre bâti de là, laisse s'envola, et ses pierres ont vainqueur l'appel, s'il lui convient de refuser. Rien n'est fait, toi vite, vite, il va s'en va, puis il revient. Tout croit la tenir, il t'évite, tu crois les vider, il te tient.
Oh, good. Do you like the summer arts camp?
Yeah.
What did you do with the clay?
Well, we make pottery with them, and we've made bowls, and we've made these sun things, and I've also made a frog out scrap. And in music, we've made our own instruments and been practicing for the program.
Cool. And tell me what you've done with painting.
We've been working on paper mache and painting paper mache balloons.
Daniel Ogata was born of immigrant parents in 1919 in Stockton, California. Forced to leave their home and family business at the outset of World War II, the Ogatas were interned by the U.S. government at a labor camp outside of Monticello, Arkansas. Dan was at the camp for 2.5 years, but was released before the end of the war to go to Chicago and work in war production. Like his father before him, Dan is a Presbyterian, but he was excluded from many churches in Chicago because of his Japanese background.
But there was a church in Chicago where they put an ad in the Chicago Tribune that all evacuees and internees are welcome. How about that? And so that's where we went to worship. And when I was there, I taught a Bible class. Gradually that led me into going into the ministry.
Ogata became a minister, serving congregations throughout Iowa and Minnesota, but he eventually settled where he felt most welcome, in Grinnell.
I really didn't know anyone here at all, but the people in the church, who called me, who were on the committee, were very nice to me. They welcomed us with open arms, and that sure made a difference. Yeah. And the church grew. The membership doubled in about 4 years. In fact, it grew so much that we had to build a new building.
Of course, you can see the Foster and Bailey building off in the distance. We know that that was the site of Billy Robinson's workshop where he developed some of the early airplane components that went into his air-cooled rotary engine.
Robinson was a lot like the Wright brothers. He started out making bicycles, but Billy Robinson dreamed of flying. And that dream became a reality in many other ways. He wasn't just a flyer, he was a great flyer. He set airspeed records, he set distance records. He was the second person in U.S. history to actually deliver airmail, and he set a number of altitude records. He went higher and higher. And he was trying to break his own record in March of 1916, trying to create some publicity for the company, maybe a short-term boost in revenues, when apparently he passed out from the lack of oxygen and crashed and died somewhere between Grinnell and Gilman. It was a devastating event for the city of Grinnell, both because they lost such a great pioneer in Billy Robinson, but also that is really the death of the Grinnell Aeroplane Company and all of the dreams that Robinson had. But still, for a while there in the early 20th century, Grinnell really was a hub for innovation and transportation. It was all happening in Grinnell. And that is really the reason that about 5 years ago, a state committee picked Grinnell to be the site of the Iowa Transportation Museum, on the site of the old Spalding complex. A state-of-the-art tourist museum, a hands-on facility where people can experience the whole history of transportation, all of it happening here in Grinnell, in part because of people like the Spaldings, like the Robinsons, who changed the face of transportation forever.
Claude Wesley Ahrens was born on August 18, 1912. He graduated from Grinnell High School and attended Grinnell College. He married Dolly Hay in 1937, and Claude and Dolly had one son, Paul Ahrens. Predicting the growing market for hybrid seed corn, Claude founded the Ahrens Hybrid Seed Corn Company in 1940. 7 years later, he sold the company to Cargill. He then launched what would become the Miracle Recreation Equipment Company, initially relying on a single product, the Miracle Whirl. The merry-go-round set a new standard for the recreation industry, and the company became the world's #1 manufacturer of playground equipment, holding no less than 16 patents for their design innovations. A fortuitous opportunity emerged when Claude Ahrens one day happened to meet McDonald's founder Ray Kroc.
We happened to be at a country club one time when Kroc was sitting at the table next to us with 6 or 8 people. And this guy stood up and he said, "Ray Kroc," he said, "you're the best merchandiser in the world." Well, Claude was always kind of outspoken and friendly. He never knew a stranger. So he'd say, "Well, I don't know if I agree to that." And this guy turned around and said, "What?" And you could kind of tell the guy was trying to play up to Ray Kroc when he said that. And Claude said, "Well, I don't know that Mr. Kroc is any better merchandiser than I am." Oh, the guy said, "What's your name?" The guy started laughing at Claude. Claude said, "My name's Claude Ahrens." And Ray Kroc got up out of his chair and came over to our table and he said, "Mr. Ahrens," he said, "I'd like to know, why do you think you're as good a merchandiser as me?" Ray says, "You think you can increase my sales?" Well, Claude said, "Yeah, I'm fairly sure I could." Ray Kroc looked at him, he said, "Okay," he said, "just how would you do it?" Well, Claude says, "I don't know that, I just want to tell you." He said, "What do you do for people for nothing?" Ray looked at him, he said, "Well, Mr. Ahrens, what's it going to cost me?" Well, Claude says, "I'd just like to make you a little side bet." Claude bet Ray Kroc $250,000 that he could improve his sales. We come back and we developed a playground for Ray Kroc. We took it out and we installed it. This playground ended up increasing McDonald's sales at that store over 35% in the first quarter of the year. Now, that was tremendous. Ray Kroc had to say, "You know, Claude, you are a better merchandiser than I." And he did that, and he proved that to the fact that they were ordering up to 500 playgrounds per year.
With the worldwide success of Miracle, Claude turned his attention to his hometown. In 1994, Claude donated more than $4 million and 50 acres to build the Ahrens Pascal Memorial Park and Ahrens Family Center. To this day, the park continues to expand and add state-of-the-art facilities. Claude died in October of 2000, but his legacy of giving continues to this day through the Claude W. and Dolly Ahrens Foundation.
Our obligation to life was to leave this world a better place than where we found it.
And if you really study that lesson, you can apply it to everything that you do in life. Whether it's your children, whether it's your company, whether it's your church, whether it's the people you're around, the community in the town. And I think that says a lot about Grinnell. I think Grinnell is leaving better than you found it. I think that the forefathers were leaving better than you found it.
With two hospitals competing throughout the 1900s, there came a time in the 1960s when state accreditation rules became stiffer and discussions began about merging the hospitals.
We would hold a public meeting and everything would go fine and somebody would say something emotive and it would just dissolve. So we picked two from our board and two from the from the community hospital board. They went down to see the Mother Superior at Clinton. She said, a great idea.
They encouraged, if St. Francis would merge together, the sisters to continue to operate in and to work in the one hospital, which they did. They made lifelong friends. They were excellent nurses.
So we imposed the merger on the community, but the community certainly is the prime beneficiary, and they love it. It's our hospital.
With the merger of the hospitals, a period of rapid growth came to the new Grinnell Regional Medical Center that has continued to this day.
Suddenly this became a destination spot for high-quality physicians looking to practice the full range of medicine that perhaps they were trained to do in really an idyllic kind of community of relationships. And ultimately that's what healthcare is about, is relationship.
It's taken a lot of work. It's taken a lot of guidance. And the community is the one that's responded.
In the last 7-8 years, we've raised nearly $12 million from the community to invest in the future. Our goal is to build on our past, one patient at a time, working with the community to ensure that this medical institution that they've come to rely on will be here for many generations to come.
And then one of the rewarding things is when they refer a patient to Iowa City or Des Moines and they send them home and say, they can take care of you there. They even do it, this happens occasionally from Mayo's. You know, that's just a really good diamond in your crown to know that you are trying to give to the community what they need and want.
Grinnell's legacy of bringing in great architects, you can trace it a couple of different ways. After the great cyclone of 1882, the college immediately started rebuilding, and 4 of the greatest buildings ever on campus were the 4 buildings that came out of the rubble of the cyclone. In 1884, the family that ran what was then the Citizens National Bank brought a very prominent Des Moines architect named Foster and Lieb to benchmark the northward development of Grinnell. And they had this great building, the Spencer Building, built in 1884. It has been restored within the last 5 years or so. It really is a great example, and it was, outside of Earl on campus, the first instance of a really great architect being brought in.
On the carry to the 33.
He felt very strongly about his Iowa roots. Harry Hopkins was always an Iowa boy. In 1901, the Hopkins family moved to Grinnell, largely because Anna, Harry's mother, she wanted the children to have the opportunity to go to schools in Grinnell. At Cooper School, he was a bit of a cut-up. One class election, he arranged for the ballots to be stuffed because he really objected to the way the teachers sort of made sure that their favorite students would get elected to public offices. And Hopkins didn't think this was right, so he sort of rigged this one election. And of course, they found out about it and they invalidated the election. This was a way that Hopkins was sort of initiated into electoral politics.
Harry Hopkins was an athlete, playing tennis, baseball, and basketball at Grinnell College. With an obvious competitive intensity, he helped lead his college basketball team to a championship and earned the nickname Dirty Harry.
He did not get very good grades in the beginning. By the time Hopkins was a second semester junior and a senior, he began to take his education seriously and sort of absorbed this commitment to public service.
Soon after graduating from the college and leaving his hometown, Hopkins became a social worker in the teeming slums of New York's Lower East Side. When New York Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected president in 1932, he called on Hopkins to lead the newly formed WPA. Hopkins eventually became FDR's top advisor, helping establish and guide the country's complex relations with its allies during World War II until the president's death in 1945. Hopkins himself died 1 year later of a stomach ailment. Grinnell always figured prominently in Hopkins' life.
So he did come back. He came back as WPA director. He came back to give speeches to students here at Grinnell. He came back to buy a farm in 1940 when FDR told him he might want to run for president, which didn't pan out. But he felt this tug and this tie very strongly. And Hopkins' legacy is that there is value in public service, that it is not all about how much money you can make or how much power you can wield, but that is the responsibility of every citizen to do what he or she can to perform a service for his or her country. And I think that's what Hopkins would have liked to have left behind, and I think that's what he did leave behind.
I came with my family in 1952 to Grinnell. My folks, I'm sure, would have said that the first thing they noticed about Grinnell is the school system was a lot better than the one we came from in Minneapolis. I went to Grinnell Middle School, then it was called the Grinnell Junior High, which is the building across the street. I also went to the old Grinnell High School building, which is now the parking lot across the street. You know, it's strange, in my whole public school life, I only got to go to old buildings that they quit using after I was there. In the 50s, there were just 2 supermarkets, and I worked 2 years in one of the supermarkets and 2 years in the other supermarket. So in that 4-year period of going to high school here, I figure I sacked groceries and met just about everybody who lived in town. But those relationships, those friendships have endured today. You know, that was 50 years ago, but I still see some of the same people, and we still talk, and they know who I am, white beard and all. So I'm proud of that.
Henry Sullivan was perhaps one of the two greatest American architects ever. Sullivan is widely recognized as the father of the Chicago School of Architecture. And in the Merchants National Bank building here in Grinnell, you can see in one hand the simplicity of this brick box. The terracotta entryway gives the appearance of a keyhole. So you know your money is going to be safe because there's this brick box, but at the same time, there's all this natural light that comes in from that stained glass window to the east, and then there's the stained glass inside the keyhole, which is known as the rose window. It's been a National Historic Landmark since 1976. Our entire downtown is a National Historic Registered Commercial District, but the Merchants National Bank building is an actual historic landmark, and for good reason.